popular wrestlers. There he earned the nickname the Canadian Crippler Benoit. He was with the WCW for 1 year, and then he was with the ECW for 1 year, where he got his first American title win. During that time, he also broke an opponent's neck named Sabu. And I watched that match, and it was like crazy. I think he landed wrong, or
yeah, he flipped him, kind of slammed him down on his head, and Sabu immediately rolled out of the ring in severe pain. The match was over in like 2 minutes.
So then he was forced to leave the ECW when his work visa expired. He then went back to WCW, and he was put in the cruiserweight division, so he had a lot of matches with smaller guys, including former rivals in Japan.
In 1995, Ric Flair asked him if he would join the Four Horsemen. Four Horsemen were pretty big back in the 80s, and in WCW time, they decided to bring that back around with a few new wrestlers added in. There have been many different wrestlers in the Four Horsemen, but eventually I'd say the main four in WCW were Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Steve Mongo McMichael. The Four Horsemen were also accompanied by two valet girls. One of them was Deborah McMichael, Steve McMichael's wife, and also Nancy Sullivan.
What does a valet do?
The valet girls, they look nice, they dress pretty.
They dress in lingerie.
They usually wear skimpy outfits or dresses, and they accompany their man or whoever to the ring and watch the match. Usually, if they're some sort of heel, they'll make sure they interfere in the match in some way. They'll pull a guy's leg out of the ring or throw a weapon in there so that their partner can cheat.
It's like such drama. It reminds me of a soap opera, but with neck injuries.
It's definitely theatrical. Definitely. When Chris was involved with the Four Horsemen, he started a feud with the wrestler Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan was wrestling and also was a booker at the time, writing the storylines for WCW. Sullivan started a storyline where Benoit steals his real-life wife from him, Nancy Sullivan, while they're working together in the Four Horsemen. During the feud, Benoit and Nancy were often shown together. They would be holding hands, hugging, touching each other's waists, really, really close to each other. There was even a video segment featured on one of the episodes that showed Benoit and Nancy holding each other's hands, holding each other, talking about their newfound relationship. Nancy said things like she would never come home to Kevin. Benoit said something along the lines of, "How does it feel to lose the most important thing you've ever had?" And they were threatening Kevin.
I guess I don't really get it. Like they wrote storylines and then they like played out the storylines in real life. Chris would stay at the same hotel as Nancy because it was in the storyline.
Right.
And they would travel together because it was the storyline. And then, of course, they fell in love.
It was sort of at a time where people started to see the fakeness in wrestling, but some people still really believed in it. And they needed to keep up the act outside for the public to see as well.
I just think that's really weird.
It's not something they really do anymore.
And did you think wrestling was fake?
When I was a kid, I totally thought it was real.
You did?
Yeah.
Like you bought it?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
But when I watch it now, I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And I see that now. So the fictional story began blending into reality around the time of Bash at the Beach in 1997. This was for Kevin Sullivan's retirement match against Chris Benoit. Whoever lost the match had to retire. It was around this time that Nancy's relationship with Kevin ended and her relationship with Chris began. I would definitely say that some of the punches at Bash at the Beach that were thrown were real. It looked a little brutal. Nancy continued to walk Chris down to the ring until May 26, 1997. That was the last time she was on WCW. She walked Chris to the ring like usual, and then next week he came out alone and she was gone. Never mentioned again. No reasoning was ever given for why she left. But after she left, she started managing Chris's career from the outside.
One man to the next.
Chris ended up leaving the WCW in 2000. This is around the time that Kevin Sullivan became the head writer. Chris believed that Kevin was going to ride him into a hole, basically. So he left.
After that, Benoit debuted in the WWF, forming the group The Radicals. Then Triple H joined in, and they became the Feel Faction. In a triple threat against Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle, Benoit scored his first title victory, the International Championship, at WrestleMania in 2000. In 2001, he lost his title back to Chris Jericho.
In 2001, Chris broke his neck during a match. He was out for an entire year because of his surgery and having to recover. This was definitely when Chris started abusing painkillers more, and he also started taking a lot more steroids to be able to maintain the shape he wanted to be in. In 2004, Chris Benoit finally won the World Heavyweight Championship title. It took him 18 years to get one, and he won it at WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden. He defeated Triple H and Shawn Michaels in a three-way match in order to win the title.
And did you see that when you were younger?
I didn't see it. I don't think I saw that WrestleMania when I was younger, but I watched it recently after getting the WWE Network, and that is a really good match.
After that, he was drafted and made a return to ECW in 2007 for a small amount of time, which earned him a pay-per-view match for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship, but backed out due to a family emergency, which actually leads us up to the murders. And we're going to talk about that after we talk about Benoit's personal life. Benoit spoke both English and French fluently. He was married twice and had 2 children with his first wife, Martina, who he married in the 1980s. By 1997, the first marriage had broken down, and Benoit was then starting his affair with Nancy Sullivan, which we discussed a little bit earlier. And now we're going to discuss Nancy's life a little bit.
Nancy was born May 17th, 1964, and passed away June 22nd, 2007. She had only one sister who was 10 years younger than her, named Sandra. She was married 3 different times. Nancy's been in the business since she was around 16 to 20 years old. The first time that I know of where she walked out to the ring was with Blackjack Mulligan for Florida Championship Wrestling at Eddie Graham Sports Stadium. Nancy joined wrestling at a time when there weren't very many women in the sport at all. Few of the women that were popular at the time were Miss Elizabeth, Luna Vachon, Sherry Martel, and Medusa. She was one of the first strong woman personalities on televised wrestling, one of the first to be talking on the mic and participating in matches. Usually she would be working as a heel. She'd use her sex appeal and skimpy clothing and her very scary stare to mess with the audience and to mess with other wrestlers.
Her eyes were pretty crazy.
She definitely had that look.
She was beautiful.
Really beautiful. She worked at ECW alongside Kevin Sullivan. She worked with the Sandman, James Fullington, and Shane Douglas for a while. She wrestled at WCW twice. Her first run there, she worked a lot with Rick Steiner and the tag team Doom of Butch Reed and Ron Simmons. The second run, she was working mostly with Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen, and that's when she met Chris Benoit. Here we have a clip of Kevin Sullivan talking about Nancy's career as a valet.
Okay, it's been the elephant in the room for the last 2 hours, Nancy and Chris. Toucan Sam, where would you rank Nancy among the list of female valets in the history of pro wrestling? She had the most evil yet beautiful eyes I've ever seen. Thanks.
I mean, you got to realize that when Nancy came into the business with me, there wasn't that many valets. And there had been valets in the 50s and early 60s. And, you know, the Sheik had a valet, and I kind of stole that from the Sheik. But nobody dressed like she did, as provocative as she did, you know what I mean? And I got away with it.
Was she comfortable with it from the get-go?
Yeah. We got away with it. And she was, I would rate her among, and she knew the business, you know what I mean? She learned the business. She was around a lot of smart people. Gary Hart, Superstar, Dusty, around a lot of smart people. So I thought she was in the top 5.
On February 25, 2000, Chris and Nancy's son, Daniel, was born. On November 23rd, 2000, Chris and Nancy got married. It was Nancy's third marriage. Their son was thought to have a medical condition called Fragile X syndrome, a form of retardation that usually is associated with autism, but that is definitely a disputed item of information. I've heard a lot that it's not true, and I've heard that it is true. In 2003, Nancy actually filed for divorce from Benoit, citing that the marriage was irrevocably broken and alleging cruel treatment. She claimed he would break and throw furniture around. She later dropped the suit, as well as the restraining order that she had filed. Here is a clip of audio from Nancy's sister, Sandra Toffolani, discussing Chris and his personality.
As you said, being shy and being quiet, those moments when they did happen were pretty priceless. I mean, we had a New Year's Eve of 2000 was a super big night for us. We stayed home. They had just gotten their house together in Peachtree City. My sister was pregnant, so she couldn't have any fun. So Chris and I decided to take her fun for ourselves, and we had an absolute blast. I mean, we stayed up all night. I think we were up till 4:30 or 5 in the morning, just laughing and playing music and talking about movies and TV and books. I mean, I'm an avid reader. I manage a bookstore, and he was just constantly asking, what are you reading? What can I take with me? What have you got? Just devouring things, so.
Once again, with that intensity, everything he did was 1,000%.
Yep. And same thing with music too. It was back in the days of CD burning. Those ancient days of CD burning.
Yeah, right.
Before iPods. And he was constantly asking me to make me a CD, make me another road CD, make me another workout CD all the time.
Would you put on the CDs?
Oh my gosh.
I know he was a big AC/DC fan and Stones fan. Yeah.
Huge Stones fan. There was a lot of Metallica on there. There was a lot of, this was back in the day when Eminem first started. So there was an awful lot of Marshall Mathers on that guy. And back when the Foo Fighters first came out, and I'm the world's biggest Dave Grohl fan. So there was an awful lot of Foo Fighters on all of the CDs. Pantera, some really energetic. Yeah, I was actually surprisingly with what just happened with Lemmy, but I was with him the first time he heard Ace of Spades, and he made me play it 3 times. And we were in the car, we were in the Hummer together, and we just kept playing it on the way home from Atlanta over and over and over. He's like, "Man, what is it?" I'm like, "What is it?" I'm like, "Oh wow!" So yeah, those times were the really great times that I like to try to remember the most, when I'm having one of those days.
Chris was often described by friends as being a loner. When him and Nancy moved into their home in Georgia, they moved far away from most of Chris's family and friends. But when he did open up to somebody, anyone that knew him said he was the most genuine person that they had ever met.
I was reading some info about Chris Benoit's friends, and they said that if they had to leave their children with anyone, they would pick Chris Benoit.
He seemed like a really good person.
Yeah.
Now we're going to be bringing up some of the events that led up to the weekend, the infamous weekend.
Murder weekend. Wrestling murder WrestleMania.
No.
Pay-per-view.
No.
Murder suicide.
Oh my God.
2000.
No. 2007.
Oh.
2 days before the murders took place, Benoit had been traveling with his friend Chavo Guerrero for wrestling events. According to Chavo, everything was totally normal. They drank a little bit, they had fun, and then Chris went home. They went their separate ways. Chris spent 2 days at home with his family, and then after that, he was supposed to meet Chavo again at the airport for their next trip. Chavo landed at the airport and called Benoit to see where he was. Benoit didn't answer the phone. He called back a couple minutes later, I think, saying he had a horrible weekend. He said Nancy and Daniel were sick with food poisoning, throwing up all night. I think he said that they went to the hospital at one point. Chris said that he missed his flight, but he was going to find the next one to get out there in time.
Because there was a pay-per-view show, right?
It was a pay-per-view show. I think it was Vengeance for ECW. Before Chris got off the phone with Chavo, he made it a really strong point to tell Chavo that he loved him. Chavo thought it was a little weird and ended up calling him back just a few minutes later to check up on him, but Benoit said the same stuff. He was fine, just tired, stressed, and he'd be there. He never showed up that night, and Chavo, along with Scott Armstrong, kept calling him again and again. Chris Benoit never answered. Around 5 a.m. Sunday morning, Chavo and Scott both got texts to their phones. There were some from Benoit's phone, there were some from Nancy's phone. And it said something along the lines of, the dogs are in the enclosed pool area, garage door is open. There are also messages sent out to other people that only said his address and nothing else.
That is scary to me. Can you imagine if I sent you this text that said, the kitty room is open and my address is this? You'd be like, what the fuck is this?
It seems really bizarre.
Yeah.
I remember listening to Chavo talking about it, and he said that he thought it was one of those things where you get a text message like 3 days later by accident,
Right.
or like half a message. So he thought it was like a mistake, but they definitely thought that it was very weird.
Another voicemail sent that day simply said that their son Daniel was vomiting blood, and both Nancy and Daniel were at the hospital with him, and he felt sick also. At this point, Chris Benoit had never missed a flight.
By the time the pay-per-view came around and Benoit still hadn't shown up, the wrestlers knew that something was wrong. He wouldn't have missed a flight like that. He wouldn't have not shown up. Instead of trying to cover for him to allow him to have enough time to get there, they finally brought it to management and let them know what was going on.
His text messages over the previous weekend to the WWE staff and his friends were sent to the Fayette County Sheriff's Office, and they were told to do a welfare check on the Benoit family. At that point, they found the 3 bodies on January 25th, Monday, 2007. And we have some audio right here.
I go downstairs to meet Scotty Armstrong, and I look at him and I go, did you get anything weird last night happen? And he goes, yeah, I got some weird text from Chris. I said, me too. Did it say this? He goes, yeah. So we call Chris. No answer. That's weird. So we go to the pay-per-view. Chris isn't showing up. And they're asking us, where's he at? I'm not sure. We're not sure where he's at. Now we're covering for him. We think maybe,
blatantly lying for him now.
Yeah. We're blatant, whatever. We're just covering from him. No, haven't heard from him. I don't know what's going on. Okay, great. Didn't tell us anything about the text, nothing.
Did you feel something was going on weird at this point?
Something was going on. And I remember Arn Anderson saying, this is later on in the day, because he was supposed to wrestle the pay-per-view.
He was supposed to wrestle for the title.
Yeah, the ECW championship against CM Punk. He was supposed to wrestle him, and this is a big match.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Arn Anderson saying, you know what, if Benoit didn't show up with no word, he's either has just taken off to like Alaska and he's going to be like a merchant marine or something, or he's dead, basically. I remember him saying that, not meaning it, is he said,
right.
But there's something going on for him not to show up.
And either option being just as viable, because I could see him just going off to become a merchant marine, saying,
and
screw
being gone.
this.
Yeah, and being gone, basically
right.
the ending of Dexter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then, so I didn't say anything. We didn't say anything. The next day, we're in Corpus Christi for a super show, another super show. And those damn super shows, man. I don't know what's got
yeah. And you still didn't know anything.
We still didn't know. We've been calling. So finally, I go to Johnny Ace. I go, Johnny was the head of talent relations.
Mm-hmm.
I go, Johnny, this is my phone. This is what I got yesterday. And he's like, with his Johnny voice, Chavo, hey, what are you talking about? Why didn't you show me this yesterday? I said, Johnny, we're trying to cover for him.
Mm-hmm.
Be honest with you, I didn't know what was going on. We're covering for him. He's like, all right, let me get on the phone. So I guess they called Atlanta police or whatever, and I don't know anything about it. That's the last thing I heard. And then all of a sudden, about an hour later, they do a big old meeting at the ring with all the wrestlers, and then they did this periodically, to talk about,
yeah, they would have like a team meeting.
Yeah, where the company's going, or Vince had to say something big, So
yeah.
We go to the meeting, and we're sitting there, and I look at Ric Flair, and Ric Flair's crying, and I go, Rick, what's going on? And he goes, they're gone. I said, what do you mean they're gone? And this is before anybody knew anything. And he goes, Daniel, Nancy, and Chris. And I said, what do you mean they're gone? And I had to hear it from his mouth. I couldn't hear that. He said, they're gone. What do you mean they're gone? He goes, they're dead.
That night, the scheduled broadcast of WWE Monday Night Raw was canceled and replaced with a tribute show of Chris Benoit's life and career.
The wrestlers received the news a couple hours before they had to go and perform a show.
I read Right. I read during this live tribute show that it was in the middle of the show when they started realizing that there was a murder and a suicide.
Right.
They just thought he was dead at first.
Right. They knew for sure what had happened by the next day.
Here is the actual 911 call from Dennis Fagan to the Fayetteville police to request a welfare check on the Benoits.
Hi, I just spoke to one of the other officers there. My name is Dennis Fagan. I'm a retired detective in New York City. I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing, and he told me to say we need a welfare check done.
Okay, what's the address?
130 Green Meadow Lane. The zip code is 30215.
All right, Dennis, what's your last name?
Fagan, Fagan.
And what's his name?
Chris Benoit. It's spelled Benoit.
Okay, and he's a wrestler?
Yes, what happened, he's a very religious gentleman, and yesterday he was supposed to show up at a pay-per-view and never got on the plane, never showed up. They tried to reach his wife, Nancy. She doesn't answer. They tried to call his house. It's out of character for him. So at 3 o'clock this morning, there was a message left for one of the other wrestlers, and basically it says, the dogs are in the backyard, the back door is open, goodbye. And that was it.
Dogs in the yard?
Yes, and the back door is open. He didn't say anything else, and that was it. That message was left at 3 o'clock this morning for another wrestler.
Okay, that's 130 Green Meadow Lane.
Yes.
Okay, and what's the phone number for you?
My cell is 646-739-1992.
Okay, what does he look like?
Chris is about 6'1", very muscular, very stocky, has a very wide neck, looks like a wrestler.
Okay. White male, black male?
Yes, male white.
White male. Okay.
He's got short black hair.
Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and send somebody out there to check on him. If you want to call us back in like 45 minutes or so. If they number I should call back? Yeah, it's 770 461 4357. 4357. Yeah, and if he's there, we'll tell him to give you a call. But if you want to call back and check to see if if anybody was there or anything, just call us back in about 30, 45 minutes. Or just tell them? Anybody can talk to you. It doesn't matter.
Great.
They're going to ask you for the address again, but that's about it. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
At this point, I just want to give a little friendly disclaimer or parental warning. We are going to start talking about the murders, and your child should not be listening.
Please don't listen to murder shows around your children. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
When the forensic analysis started to look at Nancy, they realized right away that she had been strangled to death with a cord. She was strangled sometime on Friday. I think it was between 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. The police found her tied up. She was bound from her wrists and her ankles and wrapped in a towel. There was a Bible next to her body. There were injuries on her back that suggested Benoit jammed his knee into her back while he was strangling her. And there was blood beneath her head that suggested she fought for her life. But officially, there was no sign of struggle around her, which I find so bizarre.
It's almost like she was asleep, and then he came up behind her and probably grabbed her hands and then bound her hands up.
I just don't know how she wouldn't be fighting if he was binding her hands and her feet.
He's like a wrestler. He's so strong.
She was strong too.
Yeah, there's woman strong and there's male strong. I know that sounds weird, but
no, that's a good point. He was superhumanly strong.
Right. Steroid strong. Right. It is believed she was murdered Friday, June 22nd. The autopsy report stated that she was not sedated or asleep.
So she was conscious when he attacked her.
Maybe she wasn't expecting her husband to come up and kill her. There's that.
Don't think I would expect that either.
I know. You're never ready for that.
No.
Their son Daniel was found in his bedroom. Nobody knows for certain the exact time Daniel was killed. Most likely it was early Saturday morning. Decomposition had begun on Daniel, but it was not at the same stage as his mother. The boy had internal injuries to his throat, but no exterior wounds. He did have some bruising to his arms, but again, his throat was not bruised. The tox report said that Xanax was found, and Daniel was most likely unconscious when he was suffocated. So his dad gave him Xanax and then suffocated him
with a chokehold.
Oh my God.
With a wrestling chokehold.
It's horrifying. Another Bible was found near his body, and a large knife was found under the bed, which is very bizarre because a knife wasn't even used. So, like, why? He was killed in his bedroom. In a shocking revelation, police say that they believe Benoit killed his son using a chokehold, which Michaela said earlier. And the police searched Benoit's search history on the computer, and Benoit had researched the easiest way to break someone's neck.
Daniel was 7. That's it. It's insane.
So this is like a guy who had top of his game, top of his career, probably was in a little bit of a troubled marriage, has to go to a pay-per-view, kills his wife, kills his son,
and then is texting his friends.
Right, trying to cover it up.
He called the WWE offices and was still trying to book flights to make it to the pay-per-view after he had already killed his family. When was he in reality and not? Benoit was found in his gym. He had killed himself by hanging off of his weight machine. He took the cord, or I've heard it was a cord or a towel, and he used it to wrap it around some of the weights and wrap it around the bar of his weight machine. Once he let go of the handle, the weights would drop and immediately crush his neck.
So he made a makeshift noose and set up his whole weight machine so that it would just instantly kill him.
Right. And it had to have taken quite a bit of planning and thought in order to do it. The police also say that it would have taken some pretty superhuman strength to pull that off.
There was 240 pounds of weight on it. The investigation into the death started and stopped with Benoit. They ruled it a murder-suicide. Basically, he killed his wife Friday, his son the next morning, and he committed suicide on a Sunday after spending 2 days in the house with his dead son and wife, which is crazy. A suicide note was found during the first investigation, but a note was discovered later in another Bible that had been sent to his first wife. The Bible was mixed in with some of Chris's other personal belongings. The note just had a handwritten notation saying, quote, "I'm preparing to leave this earth." The crime scene suggested deliberation, thought, and planning, not a drug-fueled event or someone with brain damage or roid rage, suggesting that he wasn't angry.
He must have been angry in some way.
It's almost like he wanted them out of their misery or something.
It does kind of feel like that.
If you're going to take the time to put a Bible in between and like think about how you're going to kill everyone, it seems like you wouldn't be angry.
Some people think of it as he killed Nancy first, lost it in the moment, killed Nancy, and then at that point was like, what the fuck do I do now? And had to figure out what to do with everything else. They were planning on opening a wrestling school, so Chris was actually going to take the leap to leave wrestling completely and just become a teacher for other people. I don't know if that was something he could handle emotionally.
A memorial for Nancy and Daniel took place in Daytona Beach, Florida, July 14th, 2007. Both Nancy and Daniel were cremated and their ashes were put in star-shaped urns. Chris Benoit was also cremated, but what was done with his ashes is not public knowledge. Here is another brief clip from Nancy's sister about the why question.
There was another wrestling death. There were 2 wrestling deaths right before Nancy and Chris, and that it really started to put a strain on everything. I think that Nancy was getting nervous that something was going to happen to him or that he was going to get hurt. With Eddie's death, it put a ton of pressure on Chris as well. And I said a long time ago to Paul that he was in a state of perpetual bereavement. He was in a state of perpetual bereavement. It did not stop. And I think that when I said that to Paul, he's like, oh my God, that's it. I never thought, he's like, that's it. He was.
Let me expand upon that because I was going to say this. you mentioned Mike Durham, and I know Johnny Grunge. He was kind of the middleman and a real calming influence. As crazy as he was, I know he was very involved. You mentioned that he, helped Chris and Nancy get back together. Johnny passed away.
He did.
Then a short time later, a guy called Black Cat, Victor Marr, who was one of Chris's mentors in Japan, passed away. After that, a guy called Ray Traylor, who was the big boss man. I'm sure you know all these guys. Another friend of Chris. And after Ray passed away, Chris called me and he was crying. And he said, I can't take it. I can't take any more of my friends dying. And lo and behold, a year or so later, his best friend dies. Like I mentioned, it was Dean and Jericho, and it was Eddie and Chris. And those two guys always got along. I don't know what it was with them, but they had a connection that no one else had, in the ring, out of the ring. And at Eddie's funeral, Chris, he came up to me once and crying and was hugging me like a child hugging a mom or a dad that doesn't want to be taken away. Like just crushing, heart crushing reaction.
So the real question is, why did this happen? It could have been drugs, the long-term painkillers that he was on, his fight with alcoholism. Some of his friends said that he was an alcoholic. The long-term steroid damage, the brain trauma from wrestling, maybe the stress of his health, his children, his marriage that was maybe failing. And also during this time, he had a steady stream of 6 friends die in 2 years, and that caused a long, drawn-out depression.
Probably the death that hit Benoit the hardest was the death of his best friend, Eddie Guerrero. I think that was 2005 that he passed away. He was 38 years old, and he died from heart failure because of his steroid use. I think they found him in his hotel room. Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit worked together for 20 years or more. They were always together, traveling together, doing everything together. They worked out together.
He was his confidant about his marriage problems, right?
He was the only person that Benoit could talk to at all. They talked for hours and hours about everything. Benoit could tell him anything at any time, and he lost the only person that he could really open up to more than anybody else. After Eddie Guerrero died, there was a tribute show on WWE for him, for his life, and there was a segment with Chris Benoit talking about him, and he breaks down and bawls his eyes out, and it's probably the saddest thing I've seen in a long time. I cried just watching it. It was awful.
So basically the death crushed him emotionally.
Completely.
For years. Or could it be because of the unregulated wrestling industry that pushes its performers to the point of death with no perks of a union, no retirement plan, or health care? So basically, it's an industry that uses and spits out its performers. No injury plan. Most of them have to go out even if they're injured because they have to get paid. So they use painkillers and steroids. It's basically an industry that encourages comic book bodies and breeds addicts. And eventually, they succumb to the pressures of that. They all have to use steroids. They have to use painkillers. And there's no help from their industry.
At least back then, there definitely wasn't anything. They were expected to be wrestling on TV every week and expected to do the house shows in between that, traveling thousands of miles all the time, every week, months at a time.
That seems like a lot of pressure. Chris's doctor, Phil Austin, prescribed a 10-month supply of steroids to Benoit every 3 to 4 weeks. So listen to that again, a 10-month supply of steroids every month.
That's disgusting.
From May 2006 to May 2007. He was also prescribed Percocet and Xanax and other drugs.
When the toxicology reports were released, it was found that Nancy had Xanax, hydrocodone, and hydromorphine found in her blood. It was therapeutic levels, non-toxic levels. I know that in 2005, she had gotten some surgery, so it might have been because of that.
So what's hydrocodone and hydromorphine? So basically she was on Vicodin and like a morphine?
Like a morphine drug, which is pretty intense.
Right.
And Xanax.
Right.
My God. Daniel was also found to have Xanax in his system, which made the investigators believe that he was sedated before he was murdered. The reports said also he had needle marks on his arms, and it's assumed it was because his parents were giving him growth hormones, possibly due to the genetic disorder that we've heard about. But again, people say that could be false, especially Nancy's sister Sandra says that is absolute bullshit.
Benoit himself had Xanax, hydrocodone, and an elevated level of testosterone caused by a synthetic form of the hormone. His testosterone level may have been so high because he was being treated for a deficiency caused by previous steroid abuse. Basically, he was found with 10 times the normal level of steroids in his system, even though he had tested negative for the WWE 3 months before. So basically tested negative, then went right back on him.
They always test negative.
I know.
Until they get caught.
Right. He had no alcohol in his system. His autopsy, interestingly, showed that his heart was 3 times larger than it should have been. He would have died in the next 10 months, regardless. Wrestlers are 10 times more likely to die before age 60 than NFL players, which leads us up to the head trauma part.
After the murder-suicide, former wrestler Christopher Nowinski contacted Benoit's father, Michael Benoit, to suggest that maybe the years of trauma and concussions to Chris's brain might have led to his actions. Tests were conducted to Chris's brain from the head of neurosurgery at West Virginia University. The results ended up showing that Benoit's brain was so severely damaged, it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. I believe his brain could have been damaged, but he wasn't damaged to the point where he didn't know who he was or who his friends were, like an Alzheimer's patient. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to function as a human. You know what I mean? I'm not saying there wasn't brain damage, but that seems a little insane.
I mean, he still functioned with his job and his family.
And he could talk to people and remember things just fine.
He was reported to have an advanced type of dementia, similar to the brains of 4 retired NFL football players who had suffered repeated concussions, sank into deep depressions, and harmed themselves and others. Basically, this is I remember this is when they started looking at some football players that did some crazy shit or died early, or some boxers that got MS, and
they had
things like that. It's they just started looking at that.
They had such limited knowledge back then.
Right. Repeated concussions can lead to dementia, which can contribute to severe behavior issues. During his career, Chris would be struck on the head with a folded-up chair made of steel on many, many occasions.
And Chris would take the chair to the head. He didn't let people go easy on him. He took the hits.
I read that, not that I watched wrestling, but I did read that if you didn't get hit hard with the chair, the crowd would go crazy. They would boo you because they could tell it was fake.
Yeah, now I would say if you see people use a chair now, they're going to be using it on the exact middle of someone's back. You know what I mean? They're not hitting you in the fucking head with a metal chair anymore. That doesn't happen in wrestling anymore.
He considered it an honor to wrestle whether he was injured or not. All of his concussions were untreated. So I'm just going to say that again. All of his concussions were untreated. It doesn't make sense. And
it doesn't.
And once you get a concussion and then you get hit again, it's oh my god.
If you get a concussion and it doesn't get treated, you could just drop dead. Why would they not get that treated? That's crazy to me.
Because the WWE or WWF didn't pay for their medical things.
Because Vince McMahon is a piece of shit.
He's the devil. Benoit's father believes that his son's brain damage was the leading cause of this crime. Of course, the WWE dismisses this as speculative.
This incident almost destroyed the WWE because, all the wrestlers came out with the brain damage, suing the WWE. People didn't want to watch it because of just the horrific incidents that happened. Benoit single-handedly almost destroyed the WWE.
Once the details got out about the head trauma due to wrestling and the crimes, the WWE made the choice to remove nearly all mention of Benoit from the website and from future publications and future broadcasts. All of his accomplishments have been erased, plus all active and former wrestlers, staff, and executives of WWE are banned from bringing up his name at any time. Chris Benoit's name is not a searchable option on the WWE network.
You can't search for his name on the WWE network, and if he is in any matches with a wrestler and you're trying to skip through the episode to find that specific match, the other wrestler's name will be listed, but Benoit's name is not written. They will not write his name. At least the shows are still there, though.
I just want to say that it's pretty disgusting that these sport teams, whether it be football or wrestling, definitely turned a blind eye for years on head trauma, and they put their athletes at risk. And I think that they have a hand in this. I think that they're sort of responsible. I mean, obviously, it's not Vince's fault that Benoit did that, but are they a little bit responsible? I mean, hell yes.
They should have been worried more about their wrestlers' health.
Definitely. I mean, they just want them to perform. So they don't care if you're on steroids or painkillers or no matter, they don't care what you're doing as long as you show up and you're making them money.
Right. You just need to do the job well. I mean, people could show up literally like on heroin and still go out into the ring and they would just let them wrestle, like Scott Hall and stuff, for example, showing up completely drunk, shit-faced as hell. Then they let him out there.
Yep.
At least he could still kind of wrestle.
Many of the wrestling companies, TNA, Ring of Honor, New Japan Pro, and the WWE have updated their wellness policies to prevent this from ever happening again.
Didn't you say that although they've updated their wellness policies, but wrestlers still need to get their own insurance? They're not getting insurance from the WWE.
No, so basically you're not allowed to perform until you have insurance. But
you're paying for
they
yourself.
don't pay for it. And it's like $2,000 a month. And that's not even the best insurance.
Right.
Coaches and governing bodies say wrestling has changed to better protect athletes, basically by reporting concussions more often.
They do have more. They have a lot more padding now. They've banned a lot of those moves that cause those injuries. When the wrestlers go out, everything is a lot more scripted, calculated, and planned before they do any stunts.
It's hard to believe it took a tragedy like this to help the industry realize that they needed to do something. This is the most bizarre part of the whole thing. I mean, not the most bizarre part.
I would say to me, the most annoying part of the whole thing is the conspiracy theories.
Right? But really, you mean like the best. Conspiracy theories are the best.
The best, but because these people are fucking crazy.
So, 14 hours before the murder, Wikipedia reported the incident.
They reported Nancy's death, I think.
Yes, the whole family's death. That's what I read.
The whole family?
Yeah. So how would someone know about that unless Chris posted it himself? That's the conspiracy theory. But in real life, when police tracked the IP address of the wiki user, it was a local teenager who had lived in the same city as the WWE headquarters. And basically, it was like a joke.
One of the other conspiracies that comes up more often than anything else is that Kevin Sullivan planned and calculated the murders and did it himself.
Nancy's ex-husband,
Kevin, who was divorced from Nancy for 10 years.
Right. But when they were getting divorced, he did say things like, "I will kill you."
He did?
To Chris Benoit, yeah. But
I think he was angry.
Right.
But it just seems absolutely absurd. I mean, this guy gets harassed, questioned constantly about if he had anything to do with it. I just think people are fucked up.
Benoit will never be forgotten from his wrestling fans, but his awful acts on those 3 nights will forever overshadow his ring accomplishments.
I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about it? What do you think about Chris Benoit as a person after all of this?
Why did he do it? I think that he was depressed and not thinking clearly because of his steroid and drug use.
Right.
And I think he made a really, really bad choice. But I realize what he did was bad and it's terrible and it's a tragedy, but that doesn't erase his career because his career was nuts. I mean,
he's amazing.
I mean, championships, and I realize like things are scripted, but that guy was strong and that guy worked for it.
He worked his whole life for it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because of him doing these acts, he basically erased everything that he worked his entire life for.
Yeah. I mean, that part's sad. The whole thing's sad. So what do you think about this whole thing? How does it make you feel?
Well, I grew up watching Chris Benoit. I started watching wrestling when I was 4 years old and watched it up until a little bit after this happened when I just gave up.
You watch it now?
Well, I don't watch anything new because I don't really like anybody new. I love Chris Benoit. Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit were two of my favorite wrestlers ever. And when I found out that it happened, I was just destroyed. I mean, I couldn't believe that he could do that at all.
So even though you were young, you like knew what he had done?
Yeah, I found out what had happened.
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't really understand it so much back then because I was it happened in 2007.
Yeah.
I was 14.
Yeah.
So I knew.
Yeah.
I mean, he meant so much to me. He was such a talented wrestler. He always brought his A game all the time. I always loved seeing him. It just sucks to see someone that you like really idolized, really cared about, watch them go so far downhill. Like you can see, I want to watch wrestling now, but when I watch it, you can see the progression of him getting worse and worse and worse. And it's just
probably
miserable.
Like the drugs and the steroids. And I think he became psychotic. That's what I really think.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Like you said, his career is important. He did a lot for the wrestling business. And another thing that's really important is Nancy Benoit, because her career did a lot for women in wrestling. And it makes me upset that you can't even try to read about her life or learn about her career because all you get is the bullshit conspiracy theories and the murder constantly flooding, your Google search. And I think her career is important too. Her life is important. Daniel's life was important.
And Chris.
All of them.
Thank you for listening to the Murderific True Crime Podcast. Please leave us a comment on Podbean, iTunes, or at murderific.com. Follow our social media accounts listed on murderific.com. Feel free to help with the podcast costs with Patreon or PayPal, also listed on the webpage. Until next time, I'll be executing podcasts one crime at a time.